Well, hello, everyone. My name is Frank Fear from Mountaineer Locker Room, and we're so pleased you're going to be spending time with us today. And I'm laughing because I've really been looking forward to this interview that actually is due to a former Mountaineer, DICKIELEE Roberts, who was an all-state football player down in Princeton and went on to have a great career up in Morgantown for the Mountaineers. Called me one day and said, I know this person named Nancy Russell and her son Tanner Russell. And Tanner played at West Virginia, actually 30 years after DICKIELEE did. And he said, it'd be a great thing, I think, DICKIELEE told me, if you could have a mom and son on. And so I contacted Nancy, contacted Tanner, and they said they were in. Let me first introduce you to Nancy Russell. Nancy, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, she's coming to us from Princeton, beautiful Princeton in southern West Virginia, right on the Virginia border. Just a beautiful, beautiful city. And Tanner, thank you for being here. You're up, I presume, in Wheeling today, correct?
Yes, coming to you from Wheeling, West Virginia.
Yeah. One of the things we're going to talk about later is the community affairs that both mother and son are involved in. And I was mentioning to them before the taping that one of the things that's really been great about getting to meet former players is to follow them as they've gone on in their life. And not only have they each one been very successful professionally, we'll learn more about Tanner, but also involved in civic affairs and important civic affairs. And both Nancy and Tanner have been involved in their respective communities. Well, let's sort of start at the beginning, Tanner, and talk about your high school career. You're a big guy.
When I reported to WVU in end of July of '96, I was probably 6'5", 250 pounds, soaking wet.
Wow.
Each year progressed. I finished out, we'll just, as to everything in the middle, but I probably finished out at 6'8" and about 342 pounds.
Wow. And you played tackle at
Yes,
West
sir.
Virginia under Don Nealon from 1997 to 2000. And I'll tell you what, that must have been an experience because obviously Don is legendary and did so much for Mountaineer football. But let me get back to Nancy. What was it like when Tanner was being recruited? What was that experience like for you as a mother?
Tanner, you know the story that I'm thinking about.
I do.
The phone rang one Saturday morning, and this man asked to speak to William. Nobody ever called him William, although it's his given name. And he was upstairs asleep. And anyway, this man talked to me for a little while. I ran upstairs and I told Tanner this man was on the phone, and he looked at me like, well, this is a big joke. And I said, no, really, he's on the phone. So I handed him over the phone and I went back downstairs, and Tanner came down and said, he wants to talk to you again. And I said, okay. He said he would guarantee him a bowl game. And so I said to him, I said, I don't think we're on the same wavelength here. I said, I want him to get an education. I'm not really concerned about bowl games. But anyway, Tanner was mortified, I'm sure. But anyhow, it was a joke for years. It was a joke on Mom. Yes.
Yeah, I feel like it was maybe a weekend, or it was still during the summer, my senior year, maybe, because I literally was napping middle of the day. But I woke up to Mom was standing outside of my room, and I could hear her. The very comment was, well, my baby's not in it for the bowl rings. He's going to school to get an education. And this, of course, is what got my antenna going. And I sat up, and I remember, and I'm still kind of in a fog, and I'm like, Mom, who are you talking to? And then this was what, there's no cell phones at this time. So she had, we were pretty fancy down in Princeton. We had a portable phone. And so she has it to her ear, and she pulls it away just enough to put her hand over the microphone. And she says, I don't know. It's some Coach Spurrier. And of course, I shot up out of bed, just, oh, please give me the phone, give me the phone. And it was interesting to me because, and of course, Steve Spurrier is who Steve Spurrier is.
Mhm.
And it was a great conversation. I actually like Steve Spurrier a lot because of really how he presents himself to the public, to his players, I imagine. But I had already committed to WVU, and this was before my senior year even started. Which at that time, now we're talking about 1995, that was pretty rare. It's not like nowadays when someone's throwing a scholarship offer at a ninth grader or something like that. You're not David Sills, but so that was part of that overall situation. But the recruitment was kind of different than you would imagine, because when I was offered by Coach Nealon, I came home, had conversations with my head coach in high school, Ted Spadero, at the time, and my parents were out of town the weekend I actually got the offer. So I spoke to him before they got back, and then of course I spoke to my parents, and we talked through it all, and I gave my commitment. This was in two things about that was that, one, I was afraid if I didn't commit, he would change his mind. Not knowing how the overall process worked or anything like that. That is what I thought. And I also thought if I took any other visits, just, to go down to here or there or anywhere just to get the dog and pony show, I thought, well, if I do that, then they'll change their mind and they'll remove that commitment, which neither one is true. Right. I mean, it's just one of those things where the recruitment process is very open and whatnot. But so it was kind of twofold. I didn't want my mom, ripping Steve Spurrier one upside down the other. And then two, I didn't want, I didn't want something to get back to like WVU that we were talking to somebody else, because I legitimately thought that might be something they pulled. But then it was kind of funny. We have a cousin to me, niece to my mom, but and it was funny. So her husband called us because you had some conversations, and some schools still called and whatnot. After we had the official signing day, there was a radio show my cousin's husband was listening to, and they made the comment, something came up about, I think my name came out there about someone they were maybe kind of keeping on the board but didn't commit, and went ahead and went to West Virginia. And the comment was, well, his mom didn't want her baby going down to Florida. And so we do always get a big kick out of that one.
Yeah. Well, you were an all-stater in high school, and so it's not surprising that other coaches and schools were interested in you. Nancy, did you always hope? I mean, this is one of the issues, obviously. The decision is his, but the family not only has an influence, but often a preference. Were you hoping that he would end up in Morgantown?
It was definitely his. Wherever he was going to be happy. That was
That's
going to
great.
be good with me.
Yeah, that's I think a wise approach. And the point you made about the importance of getting an education is also something that comes up a lot when we talk with former players, and to a person, they talk about the importance of the education they received in Morgantown. And Tanner, do you have both degrees from West Virginia? I know you have 2 degrees. Are both degrees from WVU?
Yes, they are. I have 2 undergraduate degrees and an MBA, all from WVU.
Good. And this might be a good time for you to just say a few words about your professional life, what you're doing, what brought you to Wheeling, and what you do professionally.
Well, and currently, I am in banking. I'm a commercial banker, so it's something that my dad did for 40 plus odd years, and actually one of my uncles did for probably 40 plus odd years. And And even one of my other cousins, he spent some time in banking, and my dad certainly tried to talk me out of it, but it didn't work. So that's what I do, and I enjoy it. It's great to be a part of other people's businesses and seeing them grow and succeed, and having some small part in that. But what brought me to Wheeling is that my wife and I, after I graduated, we bounced around a little bit. Just kind of, we lived in Charleston, we lived in Pittsburgh, we lived in Uniontown, but she was pregnant, and we had kind of decided that we were going to get closer to Wheeling, if not right in Wheeling, and an opportunity with banking is what allowed us to get back into this area.
Great. And Stacy, your wife, is also a WVU alum, and you have 2 children?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Excellent. Let's talk about your time as a West Virginia Mountaineer. You played line, and I was just thinking, and I was talking with Nancy about this. DICKIELEE was a lineman, also All-State, played at WVU 30 years later, coming out of Princeton. There you are, playing offensive line as well as a defensive tackle. And I know that's a position sometimes, I don't want to say thankless, but I know you've spoken to this publicly, is that you obviously there's a pride of play, and the offensive linemen may not certainly don't get the headlines often that the running backs do, but the running backs will also tell you that if it's not for those offensive linemen, they're not going very, very far. So talk about your experiences at West Virginia as a player over the years. And I know that at least one game sticks out that you may want to talk about today, and that's the 1998 Syracuse game. That was a very interesting comeback win for the Mountaineers that you were involved in. I think it was 1998. And so talk about your career as a West Virginia Mountaineer. And then Nancy, I want you to talk about whether you went to games up there, how closely you followed your son's career up there as a football player. I know you paid attention to him as a student, but let's start with you, Tanner.
So you would be correct in your, how you describe being the offensive line there, and I think it's okay that it's a thankless job, because you do get the pat on the back from your running backs, your quarterback. I mean, and I played with some great ones, really great people, great athletes and great people. But it's a unique position, because as an offensive lineman, technically your role is of a protector in a very violent realm, right? So it's odd to some people that that's how some of us view it, but at the same time, that's what makes it very appealing, because you get to play both roles. At least that's what I loved about it. Now, the thing with my career at WVU, and it's again a little different than it is now. We were in camp for 2 to 2.5 weeks. We stayed in a hotel. You had 2-a-days every day. We left the hotel. It was dark, and then we'd leave after practice and meetings and everything to go back to the hotel. Well, it was dark again. I mean, there was a lot of time over there. But what they used to do was they brought in freshmen and first-year players would come in for 3 days by themselves. So you came in, say, on a Sunday, and you did testing and physicals and all this stuff. And then Monday and Tuesday, you went out to get the routine, because there was a routine, there was a schedule, and it was how every day started, at least. And so we got out. So for 2 days, you're getting used to the routine, figuring that out. Maybe you're sizing yourself up against other freshmen. I remember my freshman year, there were a couple of junior college transfers that came in that, one in particular was an offensive lineman, and then we had 2 linebackers that really stick out in my mind. And again, you're kind of trying to size up a little bit. and you think you're doing okay. You think all right, I can do this. And then on that Wednesday, the first camp, they would take all these freshmen, first year players. They took us to campus, gave us our schedules, showed us where some of the buildings were, took us to the mountain lair. I think I remember it was great because it was air conditioned. We were inside and we bowled, and they kind of make you feel good and all this. And then, you went in Wednesday night, back to the hotel, and Thursday morning you got up to do the two-a-days routine again. But now everybody was in. While we were off bowling and goofing off, the varsity comes in on that Wednesday, does all their testing, does all the physical material and just checkups, this and that, grabbing uniforms, and then on Thursday, everybody's out there together. And so you have about 120, 125 players out on the practice field warming up, and you go through the initial stretching and just the individual position stuff. And then it got to a point to where, say I think they were 5-minute periods. By period 10, we went to what was called inside run. And this was number one offense versus number one defense, but just what it sounds like. So just inside run. So there was you had your lineman, your tight end, your running backs, you had your defensive line, your linebackers. There were no receivers. There was no threat of a pass or anything like that. And then I remember, I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. And again, day one, we wore shoulder pads and we wore helmets and we wore our knee braces. Very different now, that. But when that inside run period started, it was as if it was something out of a movie. I mean, the world just kind of exploded. I mean, it was full go. You did everything, but offensive linemen couldn't chop block, and you weren't supposed to tackle. But I mean, it blew my mind. And for the next 4 years, as coming back as now an upperclassman, I used to love to sit and I'd watch the freshmen when I wasn't in. I'd watch the freshmen because their eyes would get as big as what I imagined mine were. Now the difference for me is that in seeing this, I thought that first Thursday, I thought I might have got off the wrong bus here. Good for me because these were, and Coach Nealon told you about this. I mean, he sat at and Coach Dunlap too. I mean, I remember Coach Dunlap being at our house and saying that we want to most likely redshirt you because look, you're going to be an 18-year-old kid, and we're going to have 22-year-old men with full beards, and they're turning 23, and that was kind of the landscape then. So it was impressive that first full day with the varsity. And then as we moved on through camp and got into game preparation, I was on the scout team, which was expected and was fine. But what I just never really thought about, and maybe it's being naive and just not really being focused on this, but West Virginia finished the season before, they finished as the number one ranked defense in the country. And that's what they were bringing back. And I remember getting in my first scout team scenario where we're supposed to go and we're really supposed to make the defense work. We're helping them game plan. And I looked across from Canute Curtis, Elijah Longino, Henry Slade, John Thornton, Bob Baum, Ryan Price, Kevin Landau. I mean, these are guys that, they were just absolute bruisers. And they beat the ever-loving snot out of me for probably a good month. And I remember one of them. I'll pick on Henry Slay a little bit. At one time we got down in this one drill, and he's probably, there's no neutral zone. his face mask is almost touching mine, and he whispers, he's like, "Now, hey, look, you just take it easy, and things will go right." That kind of thing. And of course, I'm like, I don't want to step on anybody's toes, and ball gets snapped, whatever drill we were doing, and he NFL swim move, some kind of crazy myth, and before I could blink, I'm face down on the dirt, and before I could even start to pick myself up, Bill Kralavich had his face pressed against my face mask, just lighting me up. And I mean, it was wild, and it went like that for a good couple of weeks. And I thought, I do not belong here. But fortunately, I was able to kind of get to that point where fight or flight kicks in, and it's just like, well, if I'm going to be here, I'm not into getting screamed at day in and day out. So I'm gonna get better at this and do better. And I don't care if I ruffle feathers or piss anybody off, or however you want to look at it. And so that was where I changed that mentality to, again, if somebody's going to get yelled at, it's not going to be me, because I wasn't in for that. And but looking back, especially after a couple of years, I mean, there I am. I'm an 18-year-old kid again, not seeing the number one ranked defense on a random Saturday during the season. I mean, I saw these guys every day and had to play against them every day. And you want to talk about something that makes you better and makes you more talented. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything better. I mean, I might not have realized it for about a year or so, but that was to practice against those guys day in and day out was fantastic. Bernard Russ, good grief. Bernard Russ is one I can't forget to leave out of that defense, because he legitimately scared me. But and funny thing was, he was on on my recruiting visit, and he sat. I mean, just gentleman. I mean, first class. I think parents loved him, and he was a phenomenal mountaineer. But but the first camp always stands out, and I loved camp after that, subsequent camps, because again, just for the fact that I mean, there were no just helmet days. I went to a practice. I took my son down to a practice about 3 weeks ago, and they were in helmets, and I don't know what they call them, but they're just kind of like pads that you would put underneath your shoulder pads. And they were getting after each other a little bit, but I just, I can't help but look and think, it's just a little soft, but okay. And I think you would find a lot of people that would tell you this. I mean, he might tear you to absolute pieces, but I do remember thanking him at our senior banquet, because he also, I mean, that it had to be done. If you were going to be a part of the Big East at that point, and that's the old Big East, and it was a fist fight every weekend. If you were going to be a part of that, I mean, there was no tiptoeing through it or around it, and he turned you into something, and then he left you to Coach McMichael and Coach Legg to build you back up completely and turn you into a player, which they all did. They all had their part in that, and I appreciate them all. I just and there's not enough time today to talk about Bill Kralavich stories and the back and forth he might have with some of the offensive line coaches too. But it was always fun to take one of his guys in practice, and it was always in that inside run scenario. That was 15 minutes of just again fist fighting, and there was nothing better than taking one of his defensive linemen and literally dropping him, pushing him back and dropping him back into Kurlav's lap to let him just tee off on them and not me.
Yeah.
It was a great experience, built a lot of character. As far as games, the Syracuse game you mentioned is always one that does stick out, because, and that was 98, and it was interesting because we had such a great team that year, and we started out. We opened up with Ohio State, competed for probably what I would say 3 quarters, and then just kind of depth and some of our just some little mistakes. Of course they did get the victory. I think if we'd have played them 3rd game in, I think it would have been a different outcome. Maybe even a victory for us, but we went on a nice streak from there, and really ran up some games. And the game where we ran into a kind of a roadblock was Miami, and we had Miami at home, and that's a game, that one and the Syracuse game that year. Of course, I could never forget the Miami game. There before Syracuse was really kind of the what I would always say was like the dream scenario. So in that season, the Brock Holland was our starting right tackle, and again, great guy, and that was okay. I didn't have a problem with that because I was approached that season about, are you good if basically if you're not the starter? And I remember telling Coach Nealon, I do not care about a title. I just want to play football. It's been 2 years since I've played football, and I think that was what he wanted to hear and needed to hear, and so I did. I played a lot of football that season, and Ohio State really being the first year. And I mean, you talk about going from not playing football for 2 years to stepping on the field at 8 o'clock at night in Morgantown against, Ohio State. I mean, it was an experience. But that Miami game, first play of the game, Brock he really took he took basically another player, landed on his ankle, and he was done for the night. And so it's that thing that you always dream about, where somebody kind of goes down on the first play, and you have to your number gets called. And so that Miami game was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, we turned Edrin James into a household name and probably a draft pick in the second half, and we did lose the game. And that Syracuse game just could have been such a letdown. And they had Donovan McNabb, they had Dwight Freeney, they had all the parts and pieces in there. And I'm sorry, Dwight Freeney he was not on that team. He was in the next time. But again, Donovan McNabb was all you needed to hear. But that was an amazing game. It was one where I remember I believe we took the lead back for good on a Statue of Liberty play, which was I loved. I mean, of course, it was because Mark Bulger was right-handed. He faked the throw to the left side of the field and handed the ball to Amos. And myself and Brian Pecanis, who was at right guard, we kind of hung out for a half second there, and then we led out and kind of led the way for Amos. And it was really cool because as I kind of get out in the open field, my vision just opened up, and all I could see was the end zone and the people standing back there. And there was just all this green. And then there was one defensive back for Syracuse that basically stood right in the middle of everything. And I knew Amos was coming right behind me by the way he was acting. And we ended up, just got the block. Amos made a great run. It was, scored a touchdown on that play. And it was just, I think we took the lead for good with that one. But, the fact that Donovan McNabb and Syracuse came in there as talented as they were, and to not get the win, and we were able to pull that out, it did change the end of our season too, in that we ended up going to a stronger bowl game. But we could certainly do a lot of talking about some of those experiences. But
what you said about Klavich, he's legendary, and that toughness, the theme I've heard from so many players, he made you better. sometimes despite yourself. And the other points you made that again, we've heard over and over again, and I'm thinking of Brian Josiak, who also played offensive line, about wanting to give up. In fact, he told us on the show one week, he called his dad and said, Dad, yeah, I wanted to come to West Virginia. It's the only school I wanted to come from. He's from Maryland. But he called him up and said, Dad, pick me up. I'm coming home. And his father had to talk him out of it, and he ended up being an All-American. So, but as this is all going on, Nancy, you're a mom at home. How much did you two talk about what was going on, and what were your feelings and your thoughts and your recollections of those years that Tanner was up in Morgantown?
Well, one of the things that I fully realized into his career there was that he kept a lot from me and his dad. And it was, I know he was trying to protect us with some injuries and some feelings, that kind of thing. Did I support him? I supported him wholeheartedly. Did I ever want him to play football? The answer is no, I did not. And so what I did was, before he graduated from high school, I signed him up for every football camp I could sign him up for, thinking that at least, that's the most I could do, was to help prepare him for what might be ahead. I think the things that probably I wasn't expecting were the things, the big surprises were, not many holidays was he ever home after he went to college. And summers, no. You think your children are going to come home for each holiday and they're going to be home in the summers. You're still going to have them. But when he left that day to go to WVU, he left. And he came home as much as he could. And we supported him. We were at every game. I think I missed one game. And the reason I did was because my mother was having some surgery. Yeah. But we were there. I mean, at first it was just, I want to see my son, and then it was like, if he gets hurt, I want to be there. I'll absolutely want to be there. Some really wonderful memories are walking home with him when we played home games after the game. And it was, his dad would always go back to get the car and drive the car from the parking lot over to his place. But he and I would walk back to his apartment, and that was a really wonderful time for me. He was happy. If we won, he was very happy and elated. And if we didn't, then, it was a little bit different. But I was so proud of him. It wouldn't have made any difference. In fact, we told him in the beginning, if he didn't want to play football after he got up there, it was okay. We'd still put him through school. It wouldn't be a problem. We would do it. He didn't have to worry about that. So as far as family was concerned, he was totally supported. And as far as, thinking, gee, would he ever play for a school like West Virginia? I have to tell you that I simply never thought about it. I taught school. I had a family. My mother-in-law was living with us because she was very ill. And I know those are all excuses, but they were just, things that totally occupied my mind. And, when this happened to him, I was thrilled to death for him, because I knew that was something he wanted.
To be honest, Frank, I don't think, myself included, I mean, nobody thought that I'd be playing at West Virginia. I know even up to my junior year in high school, I was kind of thinking, Concord would be a great place. Mom and dad both graduated from Concord, and, maybe I'd get a chance there. And, I went up to a football camp before my senior year at WVU, which was the first time I'd ever done that. As Mom mentioned, I mean, we did, we had camps in town, and Concord put on a great camp that we went to as a team, and we did things like that, but had never been to a big schools camp. Just didn't think there was any point, to be honest with you. I mean, I didn't want to drive 4 hours at the time to, go do a camp, and it was weird. but some buddies were doing it that year. And so I was happy to go, and it turned out pretty well. But even to that point, I remember when I talked to Coach Federa about it, and and then I was talking to Mom and Dad, and I was thinking, well, I need to call Coach Nealon back and tell him something. And my dad was like, well, I just think you didn't hear something right. You misheard. Why don't you just ask him if this is like a partial scholarship or something like that. And I remember just right there, just going in, and I called up there and was going to ask that, and I did. I asked Coach Nealon because he got on the phone shortly after I called, which was kind of neat, I thought. But we were talking about a couple of things, and I said, Coach, I just have to ask you, because I didn't necessarily ask when I was in your office, and I said, but is this a partial thing? And then he stopped me, and he said, Tanner, we don't give partial scholarships. He said, this is a full scholarship opportunity. I was like, okay, I'm in. And and that was that. But with what Mom said about, I don't know if it was wanting to protect my mom and dad, but I just I knew, and I fully realize this now, where I'm looking at the calendar. I'm probably 3 weeks off of dropping my oldest child off at college, 4.5 hours away. And and I knew there was some feeling with that, some issue, however you want to describe it. But were there things that I was going to go through, that I went through, that I didn't want to talk with my parents about? Absolutely. And it's not because I didn't want to talk to my parents about it. It was because I didn't want my parents. My parents were carrying enough burdens of their own. They were adults. They had 2 kids. They had jobs. They had, all the things that come along with that. And so I just didn't want to be the 2 nights a week calling in, singing the blues, and I don't want to say it as if I was miserable. I was not. But the one Thanksgiving I did get to come home was my freshman year. Because we played Virginia Tech. It was the last game of our season, and it was played at Virginia Tech. And of course, as a true freshman, I was not traveling. I was not doing anything like that. So I was able to come home for Thanksgiving that year. And when I came home, I was so happy to be home, and just I remember Mom and I went to the grocery store and filled up 2 shopping carts full of just who knows what. But I was home all week, and it was great. And I had decided that I was only going to go back to finish out the semester, pack up my stuff, and I was coming home. But I couldn't talk to Mom and Dad about that. I didn't want that on them. I did talk to Coach Federa that week at length, and which interesting tidbit of fact with Coach Federa. And I'll kind of come back to this, but in all the maybe folklore around West Virginia football, the neat thing was, so one of my dad's cousins is Tommy Pridemore, who I forget the years exactly, Frank, when he played at WVU, but he did play at WVU. I believe he still holds the record for longest interception return for a touchdown. But he was a captain at WVU. And then, but he played his high school ball for Coach Spadero at Anstead. And so, Ted always used to say, he's like, well, I coached one high school captain and college captain at WVU. I think I'll have coached another by the time it's all said and done. But he told me, he's like, look, you're not giving this a fair run. He said, you need to complete at least go do this year, do the whole thing. And then you can sit down and, we'll talk again, or you can decide, whatever. And so I did go back, and I was going to finish up that year. But again, that's just the things that I did not want to put on folks, and my dad being the person that he is, he's going to wear all those feelings as if he's got a trench coat on in 90-degree weather. And, there are going to be other people that are going to feel his issues. You know, I mean, and I always imagined, especially just being at the house and just being, you know, he might be pissy and he might be short with mom, or, you know, what I always envisioned was him being pissy and being short with people that he worked with. You know, and you know, sometimes I remember stopping in the bank and, you know, might walk back there to see him, and, you know, I would get the looks like, oh man, I hope things are good right now, because we don't want Dewey to come out here all mad. But you know, and it was very much that in that second semester of my first year was when we had the meetings. Every player had a meeting with Coach Nealon after spring practices were done, and you know, Coach Nealon sat me down, and in not so many words that year, he encouraged me to basically give up my scholarship, and you know, he would help me get on somewhere else, and but that, you know, it wasn't the right fit. Again, that's not something that I would ever have told my parents. I just, that was enough stress that I know that I just didn't want anybody else to have that. But Coach Nealon, being the guy that he is and the coach that he is, we agreed that we'd give it, you know, one more year. And if after everything, if we sat down a year from now and in those meetings again, and he still felt the same way, then I would look at other options. But, you know, that was just, you know, those were the things and times like that. And that's talking about football. There were some things that had to do with school that were the same way. You know, I put myself in a hole academically, one semester, that third semester in school, when I didn't have the study hall requirements, and I was now traveling with the team, you know, because I did field goals and extra points and occasional mop up duty. You get 2 or 3 snaps, you know, but and I thought it was smart, apparently, to take 19 hours of classwork, and, you know, and I did. I put myself in a hole where, starting the very next semester, I started digging myself out. But it, you know, what it did is it put my entrance into the School of Business and Economics in jeopardy. And, you know, that was another thing that I didn't, you know, that weighed me every day, that I didn't necessarily want to convey to my parents, you know, my worries. I mean, I do remember coming home. I can tell you exactly where I stood in the house that I grew up in when I told them both that I had just found out I had gotten into the School of Business and Economics, and, you know, and how exciting that was. And of course, you know, that's something I definitely want to share with them. And so it's, you know, there's a balancing act there. And I'll say this, you know, I think, you know, and I do remember the one game that, you know, my mom missed, and why she missed, and you know, my redshirt year, or my true freshman year, they came up to the home games. My redshirt freshman year, they came up to the home games, and then starting my redshirt sophomore year, you know, they went to every game, and they were, you know, and I think one of the neat things, and I'm not going to put words in my mom's mouth, but, you know, the parents of the other players that they met and that they became close with, and that they got used to seeing at all these games. You know, I mean, I think there was something very special there. Again, lifelong friends that, you know, they met, but the games were great, and for the most part, they were in a stadium full of thousands of people. In high school, you know, my dad never attended a practice. Never. He and mom, again, they never missed a game, but they were not the parents to think that they would go to practice and stand over and, you know, anything like that. And my freshman year, they came up for a weekend, and it was during spring ball, and so they came over to a practice, which kind of made me nervous, but at the same time, I mean, it is what it is. But now we're in the stadium for spring practice, and there's nobody in there. And my parents were sitting in the stands, so they could basically hear everything. And we got into one-on-one path drills. And as I recall, I'm pretty sure it was Gary Stills, and he and I were going at it pretty good. And that day he got the better of me, and I was not very good at controlling my language, in my own disgust at that time. And so we went to dinner after that practice, and and I swear Mom, she kind of sat there and just like looking down and just like, oh my gosh, and I knew she had heard everything I'd said, and they didn't come to another practice after that. They would always come to the last day of camp. The last day of camp, we would always have the big scrimmage, and Coach Nealon would try to run us after that. I mean, it was a marathon day, and he would always try to just make sure we didn't want to go out that night and have too much fun, which we always did. But so she and Dad would come to those and come to the games. But boy, after that practice, yeah, they were not coming back to that. But then the other side of that is, I remember in 90, it would have been 98, we played Temple at the old vet. And I mean, that stadium was made to hear the whole, I don't know, probably 90,000 people. And there might, I mean, Mom, if you remember this, there might have been 300 people in the stands that day. And 250 of them were wearing blue and gold. And, so I'd come off the field, and, the coach Legs going through this and going through that. And I could hear my mom and dad talking. And I can remember thinking, and I believe I even turned around one time and just to get my dad's attention. Like, no, that's not what happened. It's not what you need to worry about. You're wrong. Just be quiet, that kind of thing. But the support, as my mom said, was never in question. I mean, and I mean, absolutely never. And I know if I had come home, and I knew it then. I mean, it's not something that I realized. I mean, if I had come home and had changed my trajectory, they would have been 100% behind that as well. I mean, it would not have mattered. And I knew that. I always knew that.
Yeah. One of the things that just strikes me, and we'll turn to Nancy here, is that, people say, well, if you go to college, life starts after you graduate. Well, it doesn't. Life is happening as you're there. And here you were, as a high school All-American, going to WVU, eventually became a starter and became co-captain of the 2000 team, won several awards given by WVU for outstanding leadership and your play as an offensive lineman, contributor to the team, leader of the team. And you went through very tough times to be able to get there. And it just reinforces anything that's worthwhile. It's going to be tough. And if you value it enough, and if you're persistent enough, and if you have the support you had, the culture of your home life, and the support and culture you had up at the university, that's so important. And oftentimes it's missing.
I remember we were at Pittsburgh one day, and we had some friends who had a box. And when he came down through the tunnel, I was hanging over the edge and said something to him. And he just kind of stopped, like, oh my gosh, this sounds like my mom. Hello, it is. So yes, once in a while, I guess things like that do happen.
I had my mom as a teacher in junior high, and junior high was that point where she's like, oh man, I've got a parent that's doing something. I mean, like one of my classmates, his dad was our principal for 6 years. And, and I know that drove him nuts. And, having my mom as a teacher in junior high was just, I mean, I was in a weird phase in life anyway, as a kid that age. But it was always, like she would talk about, and I remember that was the Pitt game in 98. But in 98, I do remember, just hearing her voice, and I'm just looking for it because, I mean, like, that's my mom. I hear my mom. I want to wave at her. I want to blow her a kiss. I want to do something, I mean, because I loved that support. And it was always great to hear their voices.
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you, this has been, so refreshing for me and also reinforcing so many of the themes that we've covered, that you've covered, I think are important, particularly for fans to be aware of. I mean, we as fans, I mean, we turn on the TV or we buy a ticket, go to a game. And unless you played the game, unless you have insider knowledge as a parent, or in some other role, you really don't know what sort of is in between, what leads up to the games and what happens after that. And part of that, and we talked about it earlier, is the work you've done in civic affairs. When you think about it, Nancy, you were an educator. Um, that's a full-time job. At the same time, there's been this spirit in the Russell family that you're not only in the community, but you're of the community, and you need to give back. And same thing for Tanner. I mean, one of the things that I did in getting ready for this program is just do a newspaper search of all the things you've been involved in Wheeling, and all major things. So Nancy, let me start with you. Talk about your hospital work and why you decided to get into community affairs and other roles that you played as a volunteer and a local leader in the Princeton area.
Well, I worked with Celebrate Recovery. Well, it's for recovering addicts of different types of drugs. And I worked with that group for a while, and then COVID hit. But with the hospital, I retired, and then I substituted for 11 years, and then I quit again. But I missed it so much, and I wanted to do something, especially after COVID. And so I went to the hospital, and it's very fulfilling. I think people think, oh, volunteers just answer the phone or something, but that's not really true. We take people back to labs or X-ray, people who can't walk or just aren't able to get long distances within the hospital. We put them in wheelchairs and we take them where they need to be. For a while, I worked in outpatient oncology, and that was really rewarding for me. I mean, I loved helping to take care of them and give them the things they needed. But right now, we've started a new program. It's a cuddling program where children that are born with drug addictions are very unsettled and have great difficulty getting comfortable. And so we cuddle babies, and it is fulfilling. And there aren't that many of us. It's a little nerve-wracking because a lot of times they just don't stop crying. And I did have a nurse to tell me at one point that some of them were so miserable, basically, that they refused to eat. So, trying to help these little things that are in the condition that they're in through absolutely no fault of their own is very satisfying. And I feel like, that's something I want to do as long as I can.
Just amazing. Tanner, one of the articles that I read about you, I'm going to read the headline of your work in Wheeling. Service is paramount to Tanner Russell. And I know you've led a number of initiatives, very important initiatives, not only for current Wheeling, but in the future in terms of strategic action. You've worked on a committee that relates to the psychiatric hospital there. So talk about your community work, like mother, like son, right?
Yes, very much so. And one thing that again comes to mind with something that you may not have found, but I remember, I'm not sure how old I was, but I know I was in grade school because Mom was still teaching over at Bluefield Junior High.
Yes.
Right? It was junior high?
Yes.
So she would throw my brother and I in the car a couple of weekends, and we'd go over. The junior high had an atrium, and we would go there, and she's like, all right, we're going to pick all these weeds. And I mean, and they're just weeds everywhere. I'm just like, oh my gosh, what? Why? What? I thought we were pretty good this week. I didn't know why we were being punished, but And but nobody else was going to do it. I mean, there you had a county-run school, and nobody else was going to do it. And so, Mom took it upon herself, and again, brother and I were involved, guilt by association, I guess, or probably just couldn't leave us at home by ourselves at the time. But she was going to go over and get it done because it needed to be done. It should have been taken care of. And when I came to Wheeling, I was able to, or I was encouraged to get involved with a lot of things because of the job that I had. And I've been involved with the Chamber of Commerce probably since 2007. Rotary and all these things, other things that I'd seen my dad do. And, Dad was, again, he was very involved in all kinds of the civic and area hometown things. And, but I always thought about those times where Mom would take us over to Bluefield when we were and Mom might get a little giggle out of this, but my wife and I got involved with a playground restoration at the grade school that's about maybe 5 houses down from where we live, and both of our children went to grade school there, and they didn't have a playground. They had this big asphalt area that they could, I guess you could run around, play tag in. My daughter fell one point and busted her chin and got 7 stitches. I mean, it wasn't but so again, that was one where there were a good number of people involved, don't get me wrong, but when it came down to elbow grease and doing things that needed to be done and weren't able to fit in the budget to pay somebody, then there would be me and a couple other friends of ours and my wife, and a lot of times I'd look down and, well, there are my kids, and they're looking at me and my wife the same way I used to look at my mom, like, why are we doing this? This is well, it's because nobody else is going to, and it needs to be done. And I did get the opportunity with the Children's Home of Wheeling back in 2015. I was approached about being, if I'd like to be a part of the board that operated that entity, and I immediately jumped at the opportunity because it was something I'd heard about before and thought I could help out with, and spent the first couple of months just devastated because just the fact that something like the Children's Home of Wheeling even has to exist. I mean, it's a great thing to provide for a terrible situation. It's just like my mom talking about, cuddling newborns that are, addicted to some kind of drug, and she's a great cuddler. I remember as a small child. So, but it's a shame that she and some of her colleagues have to volunteer to do that. But they're going to do the best at it for a situation that's really bad. So I was involved with the children's home, and then I'd been involved for a few years, and then there was a group of us that kind of got together probably right before COVID or right as COVID had kind of started, and we wanted to do more. And unfortunately at that time, you had the old Robert C. Byrd Hospital, Juvenile Psychiatric Center, it opened up its doors in 2012, and we had, as the children's home, had utilized that just a ton, unfortunately. But when the hospital that it was associated with here in Wheeling shut its doors, so did the psychiatric center. So, we had kids that were from our building, kids from this area that would end up in the emergency room for 24 to 36 hours before you could find a place to take them for the proper care. And that might be Morgantown, that might be Cleveland, that might be Parkersburg. And what that means is an ambulance ride, and not just in the front seat and the seatbelt. It was a very unfortunate, uncomfortable ride for these kids. And so we got together, and we bought a building. We bought the old hospital building, and with the goal to open up that hospital back as it was, as a psychiatric hospital for kids, and it has been it's been a thing. It has not been easy. I don't think anybody expected it to be easy, nor did we expect some of the challenges that we've continued to have. But it is kind of interesting though, as we sit here and we talk and we're talking about this and leaning up. I received the email today that we received our one of our big certifications and licensing, and so it's it's coming along. It's great, and we're back to serving these kids, the kids that have that need. They have a place to go in our community, and when we're serving youth that need this kind of help from Ohio, they come from Pennsylvania, they come from the southern part of our state, and unfortunately it's needed, but we are committed to giving the best possible solution for these kids and their families.
Well, I can tell you, as we're winding down here, what an honor it has been to get to know both of you and hear your stories. And I can say, Tanner, anybody who has ever been affiliated with WVU will take pride in what you have done and what you have accomplished. And Nancy, God bless you, the work that you've done professionally as a mother, as a community volunteer. These are stories that we like to tell on Mountaineer Locker Room, not just the football side. That's important, and it's always enlightening to hear the football stories, but there's a broader context as people live their lives, and your lives have been rich and rewarding. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate both Nancy and Tanner Russell for being with us. I know that you enjoyed watching and listening to them and the terrific people they are and the stories they told about not only the football side, but also the civic side. This is Frank Fear, and we hope to see you next time.